What's up and welcome to another episode of Gizmo Slip Tech. Today we're taking a look at a pre-built desktop from Newegg featuring almost top of the line specs. We have an i9-10850K 10-core, 20-thread CPU. So this CPU is excellent for gaming, very high clock speed, which a lot of games need, providing close to the maximum possible frame rates. And then it's also an unlocked CPU, meaning that you're going to be able to overclock it if you wish. This system is certainly capable of at least a mild to moderate overclock. But the downside is it doesn't have as many cores as what the Ryzen processors are offering right now, with up to 16 cores would provide you more CPU rendering performance for your money spent. That said, not everyone really wants to focus on rendering performance. This machine is really focused mainly around the gaming performance. To me, the thing that makes this machine the most attractive is that if you were to upgrade the GPU, say to the RTX 3090, you'd be spending a good chunk more money, but only getting like a 10 to 15% performance increase depending on which game you're playing. Now, I wanted to thank Newegg for sending over this loaner desktop and sponsoring this episode, and I want to clarify what that means. First of all, I do not get to keep the desktop. I'll be sending this back to them. And also, Newegg does not control my content whatsoever. It literally stipulates in my contract that I can be 100% honest with my criticisms of whatever products they send my way. That said, I do try to pick out products that I think people will like based on the specs and the price. So know that I'm trying to review exciting and interesting and promising products. This is my honest opinion in this review, and I'm also very grateful to Newegg for helping support my channel and making my dream of becoming a tech YouTuber possible, because without sponsorships like this, it's very difficult to run a small tech channel as a full-time job. Now, without further ado, let's get back into this review. Now, this machine is far from the best bang for the buck out there, but it is still a really solid value because you get a number of meaningful upgrades. You could save some money and get a system with 16 gigs of RAM instead of 32, but in my opinion, it's really nice to have that 32 gigs of RAM, especially if you plan on streaming or wanting to future-proof your system. There are a number of titles that can benefit from 32 gigs of RAM, including Star Citizen and Microsoft Flight Simulator, but as more games come out that need more RAM, it'll be nice having that 32 gigs. Now, if you're in the market for a desktop right now, you're going to have to decide if you want an Nvidia GPU or an AMD GPU. And on AMD, most notably, you have the 6800 XT being the direct competitor to the 3080. Between the two GPUs, they are very close in performance overall, but the AMD GPU costs $50 less retail price, but of course, both of these GPUs are completely sold out anyway. Now, I don't have the time in this video to go over all the differences between Nvidia and AMD GPUs, but just know that ray tracing performance for the Nvidia GPUs is much higher than the AMD GPUs, and then also know that DLSS can really boost your performance in a dramatic way compared to AMD's Fidelity FX, which is not implemented nearly as well as DLSS 2.0. Overall, if both GPUs are in stock, I would personally pick the RTX 3080 because of RTX and DLSS. And right now I know there's not a lot of games that take advantage of RTX and DLSS, but the thing is RTX and DLSS are going to be implemented in a lot of games in the next few years. And if you want to be the most future-proof possible, I think an RTX 3080 is a slightly better GPU, even at $50 more. Now, I did go ahead and part out the machine to find out how much it would cost to buy if you bought each individual part yourself. And that's one of the tricky parts about this machine. Some of the key components may be sold out, like the RTX 3080. That said, when you tally up the total cost of the parts, if you were to put it all together yourself, it would be a little bit over $2,100. And when I went to one of the competitors for ABS, I found out they were charging $2,465 for a very similarly configured machine. Now, there are a number of advantages and disadvantages to buying a pre-built desktop. Probably the first and arguably biggest advantage is you don't have to build it yourself, which means you don't have to risk breaking the components when you're putting it together. It happens rarely, of course, especially with anyone who has experience building PCs, but components do break, things do get dropped. If you find the idea of buying a desktop intimidating, That's another advantage to having an expert put it together for you. And lastly, you also get a 1-year warranty through ABS as well as customer support. So if you do have issues, you can talk to someone directly without having to go through the manufacturer's support. In addition, you can also get a third-party warranty when you buy it through Newegg, through Allstate, which is admittedly the first time I've ever seen that. And Allstate does say they provide premium support for up to 3 to 4 years as well as that warranty. And it's not too expensive, which is also nice. I think it was like $150 or $200 or something like that. Pretty reasonably priced overall for a long extended warranty. Now the cable management on this machine is acceptable but not great. You do have some loose wires in the back, but the key thing here is that from the front it is a clean look with everything tucked away neatly, but I think they could have used a few more zip ties to tame the wires in the back, but that is easy to add if you want to do that after you get the machine. Now when I got this machine in the mail, I unpackaged it. It had a giant foam block basically protecting the GPU from wiggling around, and I did notice some of the negative reviews on Newegg focus around the GPU having wiggled too much in shipping and therefore damaged the connector to the GPU or the piece of plastic down there near the motherboard. So if you do decide to order this machine, you'll want to just double check that everything was shipped properly, that everything is snug, nothing is broken during the shipping process, and you'll want to do that before you turn on the machine for the first time. Now, some other nice things about this system is that we do have 2.5 gigabit Ethernet as well as Wi-Fi 6 on the back, and there are some antenna ports. I don't think it had a Wi-Fi dongle. Let me check. Well, I'm glad I checked. So the box did have the Wi-Fi 6 antennas that you can plug it on the back, probably put it on top of your desk, most likely, but you can get some additional Wi-Fi range potentially from having this antenna, which is nice. And I do love that they included Wi-Fi 6 on the motherboard. That's a nice plus. Now, I also really like that they included the motherboard box because you got some extra cables in case you want to upgrade stuff later, as well as a remote control for your RGB lighting. We got a driver CD for a CD-less case. Why are they not making these into little USB dongles at this point? Come on. Taking a look at the ports, we have 3 USB-A's on the front, a headphone, mic port, LED control button, which allows you to quickly shift through the LED functions. Let me just show you. So you can just quickly shift through your LEDs on the fly. And most of the LEDs are tied together, but some of them, as you can see, are not. So just keep in mind that I think some of these will require using that remote or the onboard software. I believe it's Armory Crate to be able to change the color of these LEDs. But overall, I just like keeping it kind of on the default color look. On the back, we have 9 USB-A's of different types, 4 USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, and 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, as well as 1 USB Type-C. Then we have the Wi-Fi 6 antenna ports, and then we also have a SPDIF out and some headphone jacks. And then on the GPU, we have 2 HDMI, and then we have 3 display ports as well. So you can do like a ton of displays out of this GPU, which I really love. Now it does come with a 750 watt power supply, which is enough for you to do some nice overclocking on the CPU and to potentially maybe upgrade the GPU in the future depending on if you need drastically more wattage in the future. This is a 320 watt GPU, which is just an insane amount of wattage on a GPU. Now, as far as upgrading the storage, we do have a 1 terabyte PCIe SSD located on the motherboard, and the motherboard did come with a little heat shield for it, so you can't really see it in there. Now, if you need to add some additional storage through HDDs, you can take the back panel off, and there are a couple of HDD slots down in there. All of this looks really good on paper, but how well does it actually perform? What kind of temps can we get? Let's take a look. First up, we have 3D Mark Time Spy graphics at 16,700, absolutely trouncing the competition of laptops from previous generations to the surprise of no one. On a points per dollar basis, we're getting 6.69 points per dollar. So if you were to buy any laptop right now, you'd probably get less points per dollar than what you get with this machine. But we'll have to wait for the RTX 3000 laptops to come out in January 2021, and we're gonna get to see how the laptops stack up versus desktops when we get those in hand. Now for our Cinebench R20 test, we got a score of 5305 throttled. We got about 5,700 points pre-throttled with the initial boost to the CPU power, which I guess really goes to show you that if you were to overclock this system, you could get quite a bit additional performance. That said, we're outperforming the vast majority of laptops out there, but the 16-core EVOC with the Ryzen 9 3950X did beat out this desktop. So yeah, more cores is better, turns out. For our points per dollar on the Cinebench, we're not doing too bad, but also not great. There are a bunch of laptops that can provide more performance for the money than this one, which is quite interesting. Obviously, this is not a Ryzen CPU, either a laptop or a desktop, because it's really the Ryzen laptop processors that are giving you more performance for your money than even a desktop, which is a really weird thing to say, but it's true nonetheless. Now, I did test out Cinebench R23 for the first time with this desktop, so I don't have very many machines to compare it to, but we got 13,531. Now, we did do a 4K render with Handbrake, and this did have a better time than all the laptops except for that one laptop with 16 cores. Now, with laptops, there's typically a bunch of power profiles, but with this desktop, you're going to need to basically tweak the settings and overclock things as you want to, basically, but there's basically just one optimal power profile that's typically provided for desktops. So basically we just did one extended stress test where I measured it 10 minutes into the test and then again later on at 1 hour into the test. And the good news here is that the temperatures are extremely stable and quite manageable and low overall for the CPU and GPU. Now the GPU, which is pushing out like 320 watts of power, which is just a ton of power, is only at 62 degrees Celsius. Very nice, very delicious, especially considering that we're also maxing out the CPU usage at the same time. Now the CPU temperature is a bit higher at 78 and 77 degrees, but that's still well within manageable temps. And the good thing here is that does give you some overclocking headroom, because most games will not tax the system as hard as this dual load stress test. So you're going to be looking at even better temperatures than these in the vast majority of games, which is just fantastic. 2 giant thumbs up for the thermals, especially since it managed to maintain identical thermals throughout a 1 hour loop. Now, as far as clock speed goes, we managed 1891 on the clock speed for the GPU, and for the CPU, we managed 4.7 gigahertz consistently, which is quite good. Though I do want to point out that our CPU frequency did drop when rendering video, and I believe that's just because of the nature of how the gaming stress physics test works versus hard coding a video file. It's just a little bit harder on the system when you're rendering a video file. We have the throttled power limits for the CPU and GPU, and the good news here is we're hitting the max power limits on the CPU and GPU. Now, I do want to point out that we have a water cooled system here with a dual fan setup at the top, which is how you ideally want to set up a water-cooled CPU, because you want that pump to have access and you want everything to flow properly. And so this is a good overall setup for your CPU cooler. That said, we do only have 2 fans here. For the airflow for this chassis, we have 3 fans in the front pulling air into the system, and we have 2 fans on the top pushing air out, and then 1 fan in the back pushing air out as well. So overall, I really like the overall airflow of this chassis, and the fact that we were able to manage the exact same temperatures for a whole hour is 2 giant thumbs up. Let's take a look at some actual gaming benchmarks. Taking a look at Far Cry 5, we got 131 FPS, which is admittedly only 11 frames better than any laptop, but this is clearly the most powerful gaming machine we've had. Now, the reason why there's not a bigger jump in performance is because Far Cry 5 is largely CPU bound, or at least partially CPU bound, especially at 1080p, where we did this benchmark at. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we got 149 frames per second versus 116. This is a more graphically bound game, and therefore we're getting a bigger jump in performance. In Red Dead Redemption 2, we had excellent performance. Taking a deep dive at how this system handles Cyberpunk 2077, at 1080p Ultra, we're getting 110 frames per second. At 1080p with RTX Ultra DLSS set to quality, we're getting 82 frames per second. And in 4K with RTX set to Ultra and DLSS set to quality, we're getting 37 frames per second. Now, if you drop DLSS to more of a performance setting, you can see a massive jump up to 75 frames per second, even with RTX on Ultra. Now, even though I didn't do the test, you could set DLSS to a balanced or performance and probably get right around 60 to 70 FPS, which to me is probably the sweet spot visually speaking for a single player game like Cyberpunk 2077. Now, how did these numbers stack up to a RTX 2080 Ti desktop and a Razer Blade Pro 17 with an RTX 2080 Super? Well, you can see that at 1080p on Ultra with RTX and DLSS off, we're getting 110 FPS with the 3080. With the RTX 2080 Ti, we got 87, and with the Razer Blade Pro 17, we got 63. Now, when we go up to 1440p with RTX on Ultra and DLSS to quality, we got 65 frames per second, and 48 on the RTX 2080 Ti, and 30 on the Razer Blade. And when we bump things up to 4K Ultra, with RTX off, DLSS off, we got 41 FPS, so still quite playable with the RTX 3080. 2080 Ti though is struggling right around 32, barely playable. With the Razer Blade Pro 17, we're getting 19 FPS, definitely not playable at that point. Now, if you play around with DLSS and Ultra, you can see there's a whole bunch of different jumps up and down, and you're definitely going to encounter some visual glitches if you turn DLSS to Ultra Performance. So, overall, is this ABS Gladiator desktop worth picking up? I believe the answer is yes, and let me explain why. First of all, it's going to be hard to get an RTX 3080. If you're okay buying a whole system with the upgraded processor, the whole case, you need everything, then this is a great option for you. You don't have to put the pieces together. You get a warranty and direct support for any issues you encounter when using the system. And number three, it's not aggressively overpriced. They're wanting about a $300 to $400 markup above putting it together yourself. That's about right, I think, for this kind of system, given the current market. But I'm gonna leave that up to you, whether it's worth it for you. So if you're in the market for just a GPU, you probably just want to wait and just buy the GPU. Mainly, honestly, just the CPU is probably the only weakness. If you're someone that needs a lot of CPU rendering power, then you probably want to hold out for a 16-core Ryzen. It's going to be a little bit more expensive than this one, but it's going to be a nice upgrade for your CPU performance. But if your focus is just gaming performance, huzzah! This is a great pre-built desktop. That's it for my review of the ABS desktop. There is a link in the description down below if you'd like to pick one of these suckers up. At the time of filming this review, this unit is in stock on Newegg.com. That said, of course, stock will vary, and there are a number of other pre-builds that are very similar to this one on Newegg. I'll have a link in the description down below to not only this unit, but also all of the different ABS pre-builds, so you can take a look at all the options they have on the website. If you enjoyed this review, please hit that like button, and if you want to see more of my tech reviews in the future, I appreciate it so much if you hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. It's my dream to become a full-time tech YouTuber, and I really appreciate your support. I'll see you guys in the next video. Brandon out. Huzzah!